Finally, the enigma surrounding Sam Elliott has been answered, and it's not good. One of the most recognizable characters in Hollywood is Sam Elliott. The gruff demeanor, the recognizable mustache, and the deep voice all seem to be from a different period of American masculinity. For millions of viewers, he represents a certain kind of American West, genuine, uncomplicated, and endowed with an integrity that seems to be becoming more and more uncommon in both Hollywood and the outside world. However, beneath this well-known picture is a career filled with disappointment, rejection, and acknowledgement that was decades too late to give him the leading parts his ability so richly deserved. Even though viewers now hail Elliott as a cherished legend, the truth behind his Hollywood career tells a much more nuanced tale. One actor who, while doing everything correctly by conventional criteria, spent a large portion of his career being underappreciated, typecast, and passed over. According to a seasoned casting director who worked on multiple movies starring Sam Elliott in the 1980s and 1990s, Elliott is the perfect example of an actor that Hollywood never knew what to do with. Despite his unquestionable brilliance and remarkable presence, the industry continued to try to confine him to limited categories that never fully realized his potential. It's one of the biggest talent drains in Hollywood. The contrast between Elliott's current position as a renowned character actor and the decades of hardship and failure that preceded it is what makes his narrative so moving. The guy, who is today regarded as a national treasure, devoted most of his career to pursuing positions that were commensurate with his skills, witnessing less gifted peers attain the fame that denied him, and upholding his professionalism and dignity in the face of several defeats. Sam Elliott is now visible to the public. A lifelong co-worker who has known Elliott since the 1970s said, "With all the accolades and fan appreciation, assume it was always that way." They are unaware that he was told for more than 40 years that he was too manly, too Western, and too reminiscent of a bygone era of leading males. It wasn't until Sam was in his 70s that Hollywood showed interest in what he was selling, and even someone as grounded as Sam is affected by that awareness. Today, we examine the little-known truth about Sam Elliott's rise to fame, the setbacks, annoyances, and difficulties that molded not only his profession but also his outlook on a field that didn't completely accept him until he was older than most actors find their best possibilities. The narrative highlights both Hollywood's shortcomings and Elliott's incredible fortitude in the face of a business that for decades failed to see what was in front of them. There is much more to Sam Elliott's Hollywood odyssey than a belated route to fame. It reveals basic facts about a field that frequently values marketability above talent, flash over content, and uniformity over authenticity. The conflict between the ideals Elliott personally upholds is what makes his story so gripping. Integrity, craftsmanship, consistency, and the industry's propensity for packaging, trends, and instant commercial appeal. Elliott's unwavering dedication to authenticity and quality throughout his career occasionally put him at odds with Hollywood's machinery, posing both professional hurdles and laying a strong basis for his ultimate late-career rebirth. Actors who don't cleanly fit into the industry's preset categories, those whose greatest skills might become barriers when they run opposed to prevailing commercial trends or studio formulas, face a complex reality that is reflected in his experience. Examining the many phases of Elliott's career reveals not only the setbacks of a single career, but also more general insights into the occasionally capricious nature of success in a field where exceptional talent isn't always given the credit it merits, till long after chances for major parts have elapsed. Discussing the movie, Our Families, Our Mothers, and the typical casting trap. For decades, the industry didn't want him. Sam Elliott had a dominating physical presence, a unique voice, and an innate charisma that attracted the camera's attention whether he was speaking or just watching, all of which should have made him an immediate star when he first appeared on screen in the late 1960s. However, for many years, A business that was unable to look beyond its own limited categories saw these same unique characteristics that now characterize his iconic status as limitations. Veteran casting director Margaret Wilson, who saw Elliott's career trajectory from its inception, noted that Elliott was repeatedly rejected for being too serious, too deep-oyed, or too Western. During casting sessions, these terms were used as code words. In reality, he didn't fit the stereotypes of what a leading man should be in those decades, according to executives and producers. Someone who would be easier to package and promote to as many people as feasible. Early in Elliott's career, this kind of casting started, and it was incredibly consistent. Hollywood appeared only able to view him as a cowboy or other tough character after his brief but notable role in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in 1969. According to renowned cinema historian Robert Thompson, he was frequently typecast and lost roles to flashier, younger actors with studio connections, despite his ambition and talent to perform a considerably wider range of roles. Actors with a certain manufactured quality were increasingly given starring roles during the 1970s and 1980s. Men who looked more conventionally attractive or who had a more modern urban sensibility would look good on movie posters. Before he had the opportunity to establish himself as a lead, Elliott was labeled a character actor due to his naturalistic style and unique appearance. This classification has a significant impact on Elliott's employment prospects. Regardless of their true talent or on-screen presence, character actors usually receive less screen time, lesser billing, lower salary, and fewer opportunities to carry major productions. For Elliott, this meant that while he was confined to supporting roles that hardly ever used his full potential, performers with a fraction of his talent were able to earn major roles. The fact that Elliott's limits were wholly perceptual rather than real was what made this situation especially distressing. His performances constantly displayed exceptional technical proficiency, emotional depth, and range, attributes that should have prevented him from being an afterthought and instead made him a director's first option. A director who collaborated with Elliott in the 1990s noted that they intended him to be a supporting actor rather than a star. Ironically, viewers were drawn to Sam anytime he appeared on film, even in a minor capacity. He possessed that unquantifiable trait that distinguishes celebrities from mere actors, a genuine presence that demands attention. However, the decision-makers were unable to go beyond their own demographics and calculations. Elliott's filmography from the 1970s to the early 2000s shows indications of his underutilization. Movies such as Lifeguard 1976, The Legacy 1979, and Mask 1985 suggested what may have been if they had been given prominent roles on a regular basis. However, these chances continued to be rare anomalies rather than the norm. The industry failed to take advantage of his obvious talents by providing comparable spotlight opportunities, even when he gave outstanding performances, like in Mask. In reference to Elliott's performance in A Star is Born 2018, which ultimately resulted in an Academy Award nomination at the age of 74, Thompson said that despite his brilliance, he didn't receive significant acclaim until his 70s. This constitutes a remarkable waste of potential. If the business hadn't been so narrow-minded, consider all the prominent roles he could have played during the 1980s and 1990s. Elliott's character casting is especially hilarious because his possibilities were restricted for decades by the same traits. Eventually, his deep voice, serious manner, and Western sensibility became his most renowned qualities. After years of rejecting these traits, the same business suddenly hails them as refreshingly genuine in a time when male performers are becoming more and more alike. Instead of a leading man, they wanted him to be a background prop. The core contradiction of Elliott's career is encapsulated in this observation: a leading man-like actor who is constantly viewed as a supporting actor. Because the business lacked the foresight to see beyond its self-imposed classifications and see what audiences naturally responded to any time Elliott appeared on screen, I was able to limit this remarkable talent to ordinary roles. After over 49 years of delayed recognition, I've discovered it. It pained because the fame arrived too late. In addition to decades of poor casting and few opportunities, Sam Elliott's eventual recognition came so late in his career that most of his promise had already been unrealized, which adds to the strange cruelty of Hollywood's treatment of him. Following almost 4 decades of continuously outstanding performances in primarily supporting parts, Elliott at last started to get the recognition and chances his ability had always merited, but only after he had reached the age at which, even for well-known celebrities, prominent parts usually become limited. For more than 40 years, he was a supporting actor. Michael Barnes, a film reviewer who has followed Elliott's career since the 1980s, pointed out that he was more gifted than most of the leads. In movies, when he had little screen time, he would elevate whatever project he was working on and frequently end up being the most memorable part. However, while he stayed in the second tier of the profession, he saw actors with a fraction of his talent become household stars and collect multi-million-dollar paychecks. This tendency gave rise to a certain kind of frustration in the workplace. The knowledge that although his services were appreciated, they were insufficient to improve his standing or open up further chances. Elliott gave exceptional performances in movies like Mask, Roadhouse, and Tombstone during the 1980s and 1990s. But he was mainly cast in supporting parts rather than being given opportunities to work on projects that capitalized on his enormous abilities. Barnes added, Elliott was publicly resentful by the time he was finally nominated for an Oscar in 2019, referring to his nomination as a supporting actor for A Star is Born at the age of 74. "It's about time" was more than simply a touch of candor in his statement. It was a logical response for someone who had spent decades witnessing less worthy workers get the credit and opportunities that had eluded him in spite of his better work. A bittersweet vindication was the result of Elliott's late career comeback, which started around 2015 with films like Grandma and the Hero and ended with A Star is Born. It demonstrated how much of his prime had been wasted on roles that were below his ability, even though it finally got him the recognition and prominent roles he had long deserved. Casting director Wilson noted, "He gave Hollywood his entire life, and it ignored him until he was old enough to be someone's grandfather. If the business had recognized what they had, imagine the prominent roles he could have played in his 40s and 50s. Rather, those decades, usually the height of a leading man's career, were mostly devoted to portraying leads or supporting roles in films with little effect and distribution. The fact that Elliott was well aware of his underutilization makes this delayed recognition all the more painful. Elliott has occasionally let traces of his unhappiness appear through his typically quiet public attitude, in contrast to certain performers who keep a diplomatic silence regarding professional issues. When asked about his professional path in an interview in 2015, Elliott's response was subtle but unmistakably frustrated. "I've played supporting characters for the majority of my career. My lot has been that. Is that annoying? Yes. However, you play the hand that is dealt to you." This characteristically direct evaluation shows an actor who was aware of his circumstances and made the decision to remain professional in spite of justifiable complaints. Elliott's reaction to his Oscar nomination demonstrates the emotional toll that this delayed acknowledgement has taken. A moment that ought to have been one of unadulterated joy, but instead bore the burden of decades of neglect. His candid response, "It's about fleeting time," captures the cumulative annoyance of seeing award shows come and go for more than 40 years without receiving the credit his work so well deserves. He dedicated his entire life to Hollywood, but it disregarded him until he was old enough to be a grandfather. The fundamental inequity of Elliott's career path is encapsulated in this observation. While recognition did not come, it did so late that many of his best chances had already passed. The prominent parts he could have played in the 1980s and 1990s, the star vehicles that could have been created around his unique presence, and the opportunities to define characters instead of bolstering other narratives. Each of these opportunities went mostly unmet until his age had already reduced the variety of roles he could play. A larger reality about Hollywood's occasionally capricious allocation of opportunities is reflected in the bittersweet nature of Elliott's late career success. Rarely does skill alone decide who has the opportunity to reach their greatest potential. Additionally, the industry's acknowledgement frequently arrives too late to provide an actor with the career they genuinely deserve. I'll kill anyone who calls me grandpa. Isolation based on principles. He suppressed his anger as he saw his peers destroy themselves. Even though many of his peers adopted Hollywood's excesses, especially in the infamously decadent 1970s and 1980s, Sam Elliott upheld a standard of personal and professional discipline that was in sharp contrast to the dominant culture of the industry. His stability became a problem rather than an asset because of his principled attitude to life and work, which, although admirable in hindsight, frequently put him at conflict with the very industry in which he sought success. According to entertainment journalist Thomas Henderson, who has been covering Hollywood since the late 1970s, Sam escaped the drug-fueled mayhem of the 1970s and 1980s. During this time, cocaine was essentially a professional need in some Hollywood circles. Deals were struck during parties, and connections were forged in settings that revolved around excess. Although it was a moral decision, Elliott's decision to skip this scene had real repercussions for his professional prospects. Elliott adopted a more subdued style, in contrast to many of his contemporaries who developed their networks and boosted their careers through Hollywood's social scene. After getting married to actress Catherine Ross in 1984, he chose to live a life that was purposefully cut off from the social maelstrom of the profession, putting stability and consistency ahead of the relationships that could have accelerated his career. Henderson added that he maintained his discipline, sobriety, and marriage. Although this gave his life a strong start, it also meant that he was excluded from the inner circles where many possibilities came from. In a field where connections are just as important as skill, Elliott's principled distance produced both personal and professional advantages. This situation is especially ironic because Elliott's stability should have made him more appealing to studios and producers as a dependable professional who wouldn't cause the delays, insurance problems, or PR issues that beset productions with less disciplined performers. However, the contrary frequently occurred, with more erratic people being given more chances in spite of their troublesome conduct. However, a producer who collaborated with Elliott in the 1990s noted that Hollywood rewarded turbulence and punished consistency. Unfortunately, poor behavior generated notoriety, and even unfavorable publicity helped keep certain actors in the spotlight. When exciting new projects were being cast, someone like Sam, who just showed up, prepared, and routinely produced good work without drama, would be ignored or taken for granted. As a result of this relationship, Elliott experienced a unique form of frustration as he saw colleagues who were less talented and disciplined grow in their careers by engaging in actions that he had deliberately disapproved of. Those who knew him at the time say he remained characteristically reserved about these views, seldom expressing the frustration he must have felt when less skilled actors were given the chance to showcase their talent. The producer pointed out that despite doing everything correctly, he was still left behind. Maintaining your values when they appear to be hurting rather than helping your profession requires a certain amount of emotional strength. To observe less disciplined coworkers being rewarded for actions you have chosen to disapprove of, with amazing grace, Sam conveyed that wisdom. However, it had to cause internal strife. Hollywood as a whole, which simultaneously demands remarkable discipline in craft and frequently rewards behavior that undermines that same discipline, is reflected in the conflict between Elliott's personal choices and professional aspirations. Actors like Elliott had to compartmentalize their dissatisfaction while upholding the professionalism that occasionally restricted their possibilities in order to navigate this dichotomy. Despite doing everything correctly, he was still left behind. This insight encapsulates the fundamental contradiction of Elliott's middle career, which was that his finest personal qualities occasionally turned into professional constraints in a field where excess frequently attracted attention, which in turn led to opportunities. The rage that such a circumstance would inevitably cause remained mostly internalized, showing up very infrequently in unguarded times or fleeting remarks that suggested a deeper displeasure with an industry that failed to respect what ought to have been his greatest talents: professionalism, consistency, and genuine craftsmanship free from harmful conduct. Yes. Why simply change them out for 2 rifles? Because I killed only 2 of them. He managed to cover after injuring the third. Industry reprisals. Silently, he was blacklisted. Sam Elliott never received the recognition his skills merited, but by the 1990s, he had made a name for himself as a dependable character actor with sporadic major parts, mostly in television and westerns. Through consistency, professionalism, and an uncompromising dedication to excellence, he had established a respected career. However, this commitment to his work ultimately put him at odds with business methods that put financial gain ahead of creative integrity. It is said that this disagreement resulted in a time of professional exile that further restricted his already limited options. Malleability was desired by the industry. Elliott provided honesty. Only in the middle of the 2000s did this era of professional exile start to lessen. A fresh wave of directors who were less associated with the producers Elliott had alienated started to appreciate his special traits and commanding on-screen persona. Elliott started to be used more successfully in projects like Thank You for Smoking 2005 and The Golden Compass 2007, while he was still mostly used in supporting rather than leading roles. Elliott's reputation in the business would not fully recover until the 2010s, when his authenticity, which had previously made him challenging, became his most attractive trait in a field that was being lambasted more and more for its artificiality and formula-driven methodology. Elliott's unyielding adherence to his ideals changed from a liability to a benefit when viewers and some filmmakers started looking for more authentic alternatives to Hollywood's mainstream offerings. They stopped phoning because they couldn't control him. The key aspect of Elliott's challenging time is encapsulated in this observation. When the industry's machinery rejects material that is compromised or does not adhere to expected behaviors, it can effectively sideline even exceptional talent. Elliott's perseverance during this trying time, delivering quality despite few opportunities while upholding the values that had limited those opportunities, testifies to a strength of character that would ultimately be validated when the sector began to realize what it had been wasting for decades. This is all across Yellowstone. Yellowstone taints us, and I can't take it on some level because I believe 1883 stands alone. Public error. At last, he talked about the drama in Yellowstone. Sam Elliott was at the center of an unexpected media frenzy in 2022 after decades of preserving a typically restrained public demeanor, rarely getting involved in controversy, and keeping his opinions of the industry mostly private. His frank remarks on Jane Campion's critically praised Western, The Power of the Dog, sparked a fierce backlash that exposed the difficulties experienced by an actor whose genuine Western, because of his sensibilities, he occasionally disagrees with modern interpretations of the genre he is so familiar with. The Power of the Dog, a film directed by renowned entertainment writer Rebecca Santos, was criticized by Elliott in 2022. In an interview on the WTF with Mark Maron podcast, Elliott criticized the movie's themes and depiction of cowboys, questioned the New Zealand director's qualifications to make a Western set in Montana, and used language about the film's examination of repressed sexuality that many saw as homophobic. Elliott made his remarks amid a more general conversation on Westerns, a genre he has represented throughout his career and with which he obviously has a particular affinity, both in his own Western way of life and in his work. In particular, he questioned Campion's comprehension of the historical and cultural reality of the American West, and criticized her for what he saw as inauthenticity in her approach to the topic. There was a huge backlash. Social media exploded with criticism. Major news outlets covered the controversy, and a number of those involved with the film, including director Jane Campion and star Benedict Cumberbatch, publicly responded to Elliott's remarks. Some said it was misogynistic, homophobic, and embarrassing, Santos added. This incident was especially important in understanding Elliott's relationship with Hollywood because it brought to light the tension between his authentic traditional understanding of Western culture and the industry's evolving approach to the genre, which increasingly incorporates contemporary sensibilities and revisionist perspectives on Western mythology. For an actor who had largely avoided controversy throughout his career, it represented an unprecedented level of negative attention. He finally spoke his mind, and Hollywood slapped him for it, noted film critic Michael Barnes. Elliott had finally expressed his frustration in a public forum after decades of quietly accepting the industry's marginalization of the traditional Western values he embodied, with consequences he probably never anticipated. It was a collision between Elliott's lived experience of Western culture and a more theoretical critical approach to the same culture, and the irony is that Elliott was essentially criticizing the film for the same reason that many people enjoyed it, because it purposefully subverted traditional Western tropes and examined aspects of frontier masculinity that conventional Westerns often ignore. Elliott's remarks and the backlash that followed created a complicated situation that is difficult to describe. While many condemned the actor's tone and word choice, especially those that might be construed as homophobic, others defended his right to question the authenticity of a movie based on his lifelong familiarity with the culture it depicted. Elliott later apologized, but the damage was done, according to Santos. Elliott publicly apologized during a promotional panel for 1883, expressing regret for hurting people with his remarks and acknowledging that art is subjective. The controversy brought to light the wider tensions between traditional and progressive interpretations of American history and culture, with Elliott unintentionally becoming a focal point for these larger conversations. Although it was a polite retraction, the incident had already impacted the public's perception of an actor who was once nearly universally respected across political and cultural divides. Elliott saw the controversy as a painful lesson in the new media landscape, where viewpoints from earlier eras may not align with modern sensibilities and where casual remarks can quickly turn into international news. Elliott discovered the harsh consequences of unguarded candor in the social media age after navigating Hollywood for more than 50 years with remarkable discretion and diplomacy. When he finally spoke his mind, Hollywood slapped him for it. This observation encapsulates both the cause and effect of Elliott's infrequent public gaffe. The incident demonstrated the extent of Elliott's ties to Western culture, and the difficulties of preserving those ties in a field that is becoming more and more disconnected from the traditional values and viewpoints he represents. It was a moment when the frustration that had been built up over decades of seeing his favorite Western genre transformed by filmmakers with different sensibilities finally found public expression, only to spark the exact kind of controversy that Elliott had managed to avoid throughout his lengthy career.